I have sat through 11 years of scholarship recitals at the Brindlewood Community Music School, every spring, in the same folding chair, waiting for my son to play his 4 minutes of Bergmuller so we can go home and I can stop sweating through my collar. I tell you this so you understand that I am not a sentimental man. I do not cry at school concerts. I did, that night, and I want to explain why, because I think about it more than I think about almost anything else that has happened to me. The recital hall at Brindlewood is really just the old gymnasium with the basketball hoops folded up against the ceiling and a second-hand Yamaha Grand donated by somebody's estate 15 years ago, its lacquer gone matte in patches where hands had rested for a generation of nervous children. 40 folding chairs. A folding table with a pitcher of lemonade nobody touches. This is not Carnegie Hall. This is where the town's children who cannot afford private lessons come to learn anyway, on a sliding scale, on borrowed instruments, on Saturday mornings taught by retired teachers who do it for love and a small stipend. That year the school had brought in an adjudicator for the scholarship round, a real one, a man named Desmond Price who had trained at a conservatory in Europe and now ran a private studio 2 towns over where, I'd heard, a single lesson cost more than my mortgage payment. He sat at the judging table in a gray suit that did not belong in that gymnasium, a leather folio open in front of him, a fountain pen he clicked when he was unimpressed. He clicked it a great deal that afternoon. The children played their pieces, their Clementi, their Bergmuller, their brave stumbling Bach, and Price wrote things in his folio and did not look up. A boy in a clip-on tie forgot the bridge of his piece and started over, twice, and you could feel the room holding its breath for him in the kind way a small audience does. A girl in pigtails played her piece a touch too fast, rushing for the finish line, and got there anyway, red-faced and relieved. My own son managed his 4 minutes without disaster, which is all I had asked of God that week, and sat back down beside me trembling with the particular joy of a thing being over. Through all of it Price's pen kept up its small dry clicking, an irregular metronome of mild disappointment. He had flown in, somebody said, specifically to judge this scholarship round, a favor to the Regional Conservatory Board, the kind of favor a man does once and mentions for years. I don't think he expected to find anything in that gymnasium worth mentioning at all. Then the school's director, a kind, overworked woman named Mrs. Aldous, glanced at her clipboard and called the name of the last entrant. Bertie Voss. A girl came up from the second row. 9 years old, maybe 10. A second-hand dress, a size too big, cinched at the waist with a belt that wasn't hers. She had the kind of stillness that some children have when they have learned early that the world does not owe them anything and they had better not ask for much. I knew the family a little, the way you know families in a small town, the father gone, the mother cleaning offices at night, 3 kids and a 4th on the way. Bertie practiced, people said, on a $40 keyboard with half the keys gone soft, in a kitchen that doubled as a bedroom. Price looked at the program in his hand, then at her, then back at the program, as if checking that he'd read it correctly. Voss, he said, not unkindly exactly, but with the particular weariness of a man who has judged 100 of these and resents being asked to pretend the next one might be different. I understand you don't have a private instructor. No, sir. No formal instruction at all. My granny taught me some. And I watch videos. She said it plainly. Not ashamed. Just a fact, the way you'd report the weather. Price made a small sound through his nose. He glanced toward the other judges, toward the parents in their folding chairs, and there was the faintest curl at the corner of his mouth, the look of a man inviting a room to share a joke at someone else's expense without quite saying the joke aloud. Well. He clicked his pen. Given the circumstances, why don't you play us something simple? Whatever you're comfortable with. We don't need to set you up to embarrass yourself. A ripple went through the parents' chairs. Not laughter, not quite. We were not cruel people, most of us, just tired and a little relieved it wasn't our own child up there being managed so gently into a lower bar. A woman beside me, the mother of the boy who'd played the Clementi, murmured something sympathetic sounding that wasn't sympathy at all. Bertie didn't answer him. She walked to the piano. She was so small against that old Yamaha that for a second the bench looked like it might simply swallow her. She adjusted it, turned the little knob twice, with the unhurried certainty of someone who had done it before and knew exactly how many turns her legs required. That detail caught me. A girl who'd never had a lesson, and she knew her bench height to the half-inch. She sat. She did not look at Price. She did not look at the room. She put her hands in her lap for a moment, the way you'd compose yourself before saying something you'd practiced saying. Then she began to play. It was not the simple thing he'd invited. It was Chopin. I didn't know it then, I learned the name later, from Mrs. Aldous, who had her hand pressed flat against her own chest like she was holding something in. The Nocturne in C minor. The opening notes came slow, almost too slow, each one allowed to hang in that gymnasium air before the next arrived, and there was a kind of held breath in the room that I have never heard in that hall before or since, not during the Bach, not during anything. The pen in Price's hand stopped clicking. I watched his face do something I didn't expect, which was nothing at first, total stillness, the stillness of a man recalculating in real time. The melody built. Her left hand carried this rolling, patient figure underneath while her right hand sang out something that did not sound like a child's hands at all, something that sounded like grief that had been waiting a long time for permission. Beside me, the Clementi mother had gone quiet in a different register than before, not polite quiet, but the quiet of someone caught off guard by her own throat tightening. I found myself staring at Bertie's hands instead of her face. They were a child's hands, chapped at the knuckles the way hands get in a cold kitchen with no good gloves, and they moved across those worn keys like they'd lived there her whole life, which I suppose, in a way that costs nothing and no one had thought to ask about, they had. The piece climbed. There's a passage in the middle, I know this now, I did not know it then, where the music turns from mourning into something nearer to fury, a storm pressed into the keys, and Bertie's whole small body leaned into it, her shoulders set, her chin lifted, and for 4 or 5 bars that gymnasium with its folded basketball hoops and its second-hand grand sounded like a concert hall built for exactly this. The old Yamaha, donated and dented and tuned twice a year if the school's budget allowed, found something in itself I would not have guessed it had. Somewhere above us one of the folded backboards gave a faint shiver of sympathetic vibration against its ceiling bracket, as if the building itself had decided to take part. I noticed, somewhere in the middle of all that her eyes had closed. There was no theater in it, no performance of feeling for an audience she seemed to have entirely forgotten was watching. She was somewhere else, a kitchen with a $40 keyboard and half its keys gone soft, or somewhere further back than that, a place none of us had any right to follow her into, and didn't try. Price had set his pen down entirely. He was leaning forward over the judging table, both hands flat on its surface, the leather folio forgotten and closed. Then the storm passed, the way storms do, and the music came back down into that same patient, grieving figure it had started with, quieter now, almost a whisper, a long descending line that seemed to be asking a question it already knew the answer to. The room, 40 folding chairs of tired parents who'd come to sit through their own children's 4 minutes of Bergmuller, had gone entirely, completely silent. Not the silence of waiting. The silence of people who had forgotten, for the length of a held chord, that they had somewhere else to be. The last note arrived and she let it ring, her foot steady on the pedal, until it dissolved into the gymnasium's flat, ungenerous acoustics, and somehow that made it land harder, not softer, the way a held breath does when it finally goes. Nobody moved. I don't know how long the silence lasted. Long enough that I became aware of my own pulse. Long enough that the woman beside me had both hands pressed to her mouth. And then somebody, I think it was Mrs. Aldous, though I couldn't swear to it, stood up first, and then the rest of us were standing too, all 40 folding chairs scraping back at once, and the sound that filled the gymnasium was nothing like the polite recital applause we'd been giving all afternoon. It was loud. It went on. A few people were openly crying, and I will admit to you now that I was one of them, my own son turning in his seat to stare at his father with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, somewhere between confusion and pride that I was capable of this. Bertie sat very still at the bench, her hands in her lap again, and I think for a moment she did not understand what the sound was. Then she understood, and her chin dropped, and her shoulders came up around her ears the way a child's do when praise arrives too large and too suddenly to know what to do with it. Price stood last. He didn't say anything right away. He came around the judging table, I watched him do it, the gray suit, the folio left closed behind him, and he walked to the piano and stood beside the bench, and for a long moment he simply looked at her hands, the chapped knuckles, the second-hand dress, as if he were rereading something he'd gotten wrong the first time. "Where," he said finally, and his voice had lost every trace of the weariness it carried an hour before, "did you learn to play like that?" "YouTube, mostly," Bertie said. "And my granny showed me where middle C is." He didn't laugh. He looked, for just a second, like a man who had clicked a pen at a child an hour ago and would carry the memory of it for considerably longer than an hour. Then he did something I've turned over in my mind many times since. He held out his hand, not to shake hers exactly, but to rest it briefly, gently, on the closed lid of that old Yamaha, the same gesture, I realized, that he might have made at the start of the day if he'd believed, even for a second, that anything remarkable could come out of that battered gymnasium piano. Simple, he said, mostly to himself. I asked her for something simple. Mrs. Aldous told me afterward, weeks afterward, when I ran into her at the grocery store and asked, because I couldn't stop thinking about it, that Price had not only given Bertie the scholarship outright but had quietly arranged for 2 years of his own studio's tuition, at no cost, a thing he had apparently never done before and has not done since. He'd also, Mrs. Aldous said, asked someone from the conservatory board to look into getting the Yamaha properly serviced, top to bottom, action regulated, a real piano technician instead of the twice-a-year tuning the budget usually allowed. He hadn't framed it as charity. He'd said only that an instrument that could deserve better than it had been getting, which I suppose was true in more ways than he likely intended. Bertie's mother, when she heard about the scholarship, sat down on the school's front steps and didn't get up for a while. Somebody brought her a glass of the lemonade nobody ever touches. She drank all of it. I think about that recital more than I think about almost anything else, the way I started out telling you. Not because of the scholarship, or the tuition, or even Price's face when he asked her where she'd learned. I think about the silence before the applause, that long, suspended moment when 40 tired people sat in folding chairs and remembered, all at once, what it actually feels like to be moved by something you didn't expect to be moved by. I think about how easily that moment could have gone unmade. If Mrs. Aldis's clipboard had run differently. If Price had simply written his note and moved to the next name. If Bertie, asked once too often what she was allowed to play, had finally just played the simple thing and let the room go on thinking what it already thought. My son still plays his Bergmuller every spring, a little better each year, and I still sit in the same folding chair and sweat through my collar. But I listen differently now. When a name gets called that nobody recognizes, when a kid walks up in clothes a size too big, I don't settle back into my phone the way I used to. I sit forward a little. I think I'm listening for the next Bertie Voss, the next child nobody thought to ask, sitting at a worn-out piano nobody thought to tune, waiting only for somebody to stop telling her what she's allowed to play.